Good evening. My name is Erich Schoeman. I'm a clinical psychologist and I am from Matters of the Soul Ministry. Um, I am in my home and it is lovely to spend time with you. I'm going to spend some time on grieving and loss tonight, and we're going to talk about what you've experienced, what you experience when you go through a process of loss and grieving. In psychology, we refer to it as bereavement. So, what do you experience when you go through this? And I'm particularly focusing on the loss of a person, such as a loved one, especially a spouse or a child. But it also actually refers to losses of other things. Some people have lost their ability to walk. Some have lost their eyesight. Some have lost their financial stability. Some have lost their jobs recently. Those things, and their health has drastically deteriorated. A lot of kinds of losses, or marital loss. You've just been through a divorce, or whatever the case may be, you've experienced loss. Now, obviously, death is the greatest loss that I think one can experience, and we will have a look at that as well, and how that affects us. I have an hour, so I don't have a lot of time, and obviously, I'm just going to touch on all of the basics of and the highlights. My idea tonight is to give you some ideas on why we talk about grief and loss. What is grief and loss and bereavement, and what does psychology say? As you know, at Matters of the Soul, we try and give you the psychology picture, but then also the Christian biblical picture. And then there's the idea of what does psychology say? What should you do during this time of grieving, and how can you effectively grieve then? And what can help you through that time, and what is dysfunctional grieving, if there's such a thing? How does that look? And what does the Bible say about grieving, and what kind of encouragement does it offer? And how can you help someone else who's grieving? Now, that is a lot to cover in 1 hour, so I'm going to try my best. So let's kick off. Okay, so the death of a loved one, like I said, has been by Holmes and Ray. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. They put on this stress scale, and they said the top things that stress us in life, and they try to mathematically equate those things. And the top of the list is the death of a spouse. A lot of reasons for that, because your life is intertwined with your spouse. Your life is so intertwined that it is actually, it's incredible how our lives are intertwined, and it's amazing actually with your spouse. I mean, it's spirit, soul, and body, that your life is mixed and intertwined. And when you do lose a spouse, you lose half of yourself. In the word it says, and the two will become one. So it is an intense relationship. And you usually spend 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years with your spouse. So it's sometimes half, sometimes more than half of your life. And you do spend with your spouse in a lot of intimacy. Now, we're going to look at those things. Obviously, it depends on the kind of relationship you had with your spouse. If it was not a good relationship, sometimes it might be a deliverance. It's sad, but it's true. But let's give a definition for grief. It is described as the intense emotional and physical reaction that an individual experiences following the death of a loved one. It's not just characterized by deep sadness, but also an intense yearning to be with that person again. So, I mean, you're yearning. And it's well known that it's one of the most powerful stressors in our lives. And you know what? It does cause significant distress to us, isn't it? Especially those that felt closely connected to the person who passed away. And when you go through a stressful life event like that, and I mean, that just puts you at risk for other dilemmas, like other mental health problems, such as depression and anxiety and those things. But we'll have a look at you need to actually distinguish between grief reaction and depression. In any case, it is a normal human experience. So you are very normal if you go through this. although it is an extremely painful period, and it does take a lot of time to work through it. Some people, one of the biggest things with grief that their research found is that it is an individual experience. No two people experiences the death of a loved one the same way. And it's because of our personalities, our circumstances that surround the death of the person, whether it be a natural passing away, a traumatic death, um, a suicide. Those things all affect the kind of experience that you're going to have, whether it's an accident or it's a passing away and a terminal illness where it took time. And, the way that you view the world also affects it. And we'll have a look at some of the other things that also affects your grief reaction. But, the difficulty with grieving is that people don't always know what to expect those first few months after the death of somebody. It's as if this person has been torn out of their lives and they just don't know what to do with it next. And that uncertainty also becomes difficult, and people don't know whether they're going crazy or not. And I mean, what am I experiencing? Is this normal, or isn't it? Is it? Am I losing my mind, or am I weak, or what's going on, or am I depressed now? So that's one of my attempts here, is to help you to understand what you're going through, to prepare you if you've not been through this yet, to prepare you as much as possible to say, look, this is what you can expect. This is a normal reaction. You're not going crazy. You are dealing with something that is intense and that is hard and tough. Now, I've been through grief myself. My father passed away 20 years now, or suddenly had died of an aneurysm when I was 24. So that makes me a healthy 44. Won't say it, eh? In any case, especially with all the hair. And so what you can say is, it's 20 years, so it's been a long time, and I've worked with those significant feelings, and I've lost friends as well, and other family members, but especially the death of my father was a tough one, and I've seen the Lord work in my life as well on that, and so I'll share some of that if I have time throughout the evening. But there are three main components with bereavement, and that is loss, change, and control. And those three are components that you experience. It's a huge loss, and the loss is about a number of things. Now, when you lose a loved one, I mean, you lose your time that you've been with the person, you lose the experience that you had in the past with that person, that connection that you had. There's an element of loss to that, because you don't have the person there with you physically anymore. It's a loss of finances, maybe it's a loss of security, emotionally, physically, a loss of comfort, a loss of somebody who supported you, who was a life partner, who went through all the things of life, a loss of somebody who shared time and space with you. You're alone suddenly, or it's quiet now. So you've been through quite a number of things, and it's hard. And then there's this huge change that comes about, because suddenly it changes the way that you have to do things. Suddenly you are left to do a whole lot of things that the other person did, it changes the way your relationships in the family runs, because that person did certain things. That person was the financial manager, or the social manager, or the center of the family, drawing everybody together. You can hear there's quite a number of changes, and then there's changes in the way you did life, that you probably went on vacations together, you did this, you did that. Same with losing a job. Suddenly you have uncertainty as to where you stay and what you have got to do and where you're going to go, and it creates a whole lot of changes. And then there's control, which also affects you, because you've got a whole lot of things that are outside of your control, that you don't necessarily have control over anymore. So, your control is limited then, and you need to then start to take back control of your life. And that's also a whole new ball game that you then in. So to start to take control of your life is actually another psychological component, and to take control of those areas of your life, because your life has been radically redefined after a loss. And losing a child, there's similar, there's loss, there's change, there's control things. Yet when you lose a child, you lose a child that is, and it's very hard. And I think it is, I'm empathizing with people who's lost anybody, because it is extremely difficult. But when you lose a spouse, I've heard people say that their son or daughter passed away, and it was extremely difficult for them and hard, and they're crying and about it. Yet they would say if they lost their spouses, especially in a happy marital relationship, they would be devastated, because the spouse is the person that they spend their whole lives with. The child spent 10 or 15 or 20 years, was a part of their lives. The partner will be a part of their lives for years to come. So it's that also makes a difference, but it depends on the individual. Again, it's not, or the culture even. It's not to say that this is the same for everybody. So, and then there's a big thing that also affects how you are going to experience a loss, is what do you expect from life? And what do you expect? Do you have unrealistic expectations? Do you have overly optimistic expectations? Especially even spiritually, or with your faith, with Christianity, do you expect God to, protect you from death until you are 117? And I'm not sarcastic, but some people, when you have rigid expectations or unrealistic expectations, what happens is that there is a discrepancy in the end between what you've expected and what actually happened. Especially if you've expected that we will live until we are 95 years old, healthy lives until then, and nothing bad will ever happen to us, or this won't happen. You often hear people say, it happens to the neighbors or to other people, it won't happen to me. Now, I'm not saying you should have a pessimistic view and say, oh goodness, it's going to happen. Don't invite the fear. There's a realistic optimism that you can have to say, and this is now from a psychological point of view, not a Christian, but it does not necessarily go against it. It depends on what you say. If you say I have an optimistic realism, then that means I'm realistic that death will happen. I'm optimistic that the Lord is with me and he's going to go with me through it, that he's ultimately in control of my life. Yet I know that this might happen, and it can happen anytime, as is the second coming of Christ. It can happen anytime. So it is similar. What you'd like to work with is other things like unrealistic expectations of grieving. It's been 3 months now. I should be better. Why am I still so sad? I shouldn't be so sad. That's a fix-it mentality, and that's an unrealistic expectation. So it'll make it more difficult for you. So now, what does the research say? You've heard from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model of actually people preparing for death and dying, and the stages that they've gone through: denial, anger, bargaining, those things, and until they get to acceptance. And then people applied it to the grief bereavement process or loss process and what people go through. But the research has moved on from there to actually get a bigger, more complex, richer picture of what people go through when you pass, or when a person's family member or loved one passes away. There's a nice model that I like to use, is where they actually describe the wave-like pattern of grief. That grief comes and goes, and that is a situation like a wave, that it has heightened experiences, and that it also goes down, and it becomes you have calmer times, and or you have a situation where there's the dual process model of grief is what they call it. But it's a nice one, because what it does is it just helps you to see there are two, sometimes you focus on the loss, and you engage with your emotions. They call it confrontation. And sometimes you avoid it and you avoid your feelings. And the other times you are busy adapting again and trying to respond and to restore your life. So they say you oscillate between those two. Sometimes you're dealing with a loss, sometimes you're dealing with coping again and restoring your life. And sometimes in dealing with the loss, you are confronting emotions. You're talking about it, you're crying, you're telling and saying what you're feeling, or you're frustrated and angry, or you're in despair and hopeless because you're a farmer and you've lost your whole farm and it burned down, or any of those things that are so traumatic. So you go through those, or sometimes you just feel I just need a break and I'm suppressing the emotions or denying it temporarily. And that is all right, because it's not a permanent denial. And then you can move to what we call restoration focus, where you're actually trying to now cope with new roles, find new people in your life, do new things, try to just adapt to the huge loss and changes that you've now experienced. So it's different from the going through stages. Now you're in denial, and now you're in anger, and now you're there. This is a much more applicable thing. And then they also talk about a task-oriented model that says, look, a task-based one that says, you're going through 4 main tasks. And that is to accept the reality of the loss. You're working through your emotions. Yes, you are working through that. They used to call it grief work. These days, they don't necessarily refer to it that way, but it is part of it. It's a grief work, is expressing your feelings. But it's not necessary now to express your feelings and delve and sit with that awareness of the pain all the time, because it's just overwhelming and it is painful. But you're going to work with the reality of the loss and the process of pain and grief, the emotion of grief, coming to terms of feeling and accepting it, and to adjust to the world without that person. So it's internal, your own adjustments, adjusting in your life. You've got to sell stuff, you've got to move your house, you've got to do this or that. Maybe you lost your farm, now you've got to go to and get another job, or you've got such a huge adjustments. And then the last one is to find an enduring connection with a person who passed away now. That's an interesting one. We'll talk about that, but that means you're just redefining it. And for a Christian, it actually helps, because they are looking forward to meeting the person in heaven. That makes, if that person was also a Christian, it makes a huge difference, and it actually maintains a different relationship with the person, although the person's not here. Now, I'm not talking about talking to the dead and those things. I'm talking about it's a redefinition of a relationship. The person's not here anymore, but the relationship is not gone. It's just redefined. The person's just distanced in that sense, but you still have hope there. And then there's what do they talk about when they, just to give you some more inputs on how this works with regards to grieving, we talk about acute grief, and that's that period just after the passing away of the person. I mean, there your emotions are intense, and it's huge sadness and anger and anxiety, and man, your emotions feel numb, and you have difficulty concentrating, your sleep's affected, you can't eat, or you eat too much. So we have a lot of feelings immediately after it. And then we go into a period of adjusting to the grief. And then there are periods after the grief process, or in the grief. We actually don't call it a process. It is a process, but it's not a stage process necessarily, where you go through stages. And then you get to longer term periods. As I said, it's individualized. But there's that acute period, and the acute period sometimes lasts longer for other people than for others. So some people have acute periods, short bursts of it, and then they come back to a more of a normal experience of life. They don't fall apart necessarily, and they continue. Some people actually don't show a lot of emotion work. We talk about adapting their emotions to things that they cannot. A situation that they cannot control, so they deal with their emotions. They deal with it differently. Some of the research shows men tend to deal with it task-oriented, in a task problem-solving way. Say, what do we need to do to get through this? What actions can we take? What problems can we solve? And females tend to say, I want to express my emotions here. What's interesting, some of the research actually applied the female wish to the men, and the males wish to the females, and then actually help them. So it was interesting. So if you're a male, it's good, focus on the problem solving, and it's okay if you don't share your emotions day and night, but do share. do create time. When you do feel that feelings, confront it and then talk about it. But you don't have to sit around that confronting fire day and night, because that will lead you to feel depressed in any case. So, and for the ladies, it is also important that you do problem solving. But when you do have that chance, and you know, my father-in-law, another very loving, wonderful person in my life, extremely loving, was that's also a massive loss for me. Passed away last year, and that and the whole family's been grieving through this process, and I've seen how the family's grieved, and myself. So we've had times of grieving where we would just sit together, and sometimes alone, and you would go through a grieving process. And you know, you would experience triggers as you go through this. You get times where you are triggered into experiencing this loss, and triggers are any of those things that actually cause you to remember the other person, or to feel that, whether it's a photograph, a date. Some of the triggers are expected. You know, Christmas is coming. And sometimes it's not expected at all. We was at a funeral of friends of ours, and suddenly they put up a picture of our father with the person who passed away and some other men, and we were struck by it. And it immediately led us, to me and all my brothers and sister and family, to cry and to feel that intense pain and loss immediately. But we then connected with the feelings and accepted and acknowledged and expressed it. We don't have to then suppress it. So it's important, when you are at that stage of the wave, where you're ever you're at, deal with what you've got. But sometimes you would feel the need to just, I can't cry now. I'm at work now, I have to do this presentation and I need to work now, but I'll cry tonight. And some of the crying might get out of hand and out of control, and that's where we come to complicated grief. But just to tell you that 60% of people actually grieve very resiliently. They work through the grief process on their own. I'm using the wrong words. I'm saying they work through. That was the old type of saying. These days, they don't say you work through, you work with it, because it's something that continues in your life, but it varies. Resilience, most of the population is actually resilient when it comes to a grieving and bereavement process. And you have these short-term pangs of grief and intense waves, but they don't necessarily cause huge dysfunction and impairment. So it's okay if you have these bouts of crying and feeling that pain. It's almost like it's a sword piercing through your heart. And I mean, there you sit and you cry and you express it. So it's okay if you oscillate sometimes between various feelings, and sometimes you're just coping and you're dealing with stuff, and sometimes you are happy, sometimes you laugh, sometimes you are okay, and you're not missing that person that much that day, and it is okay. It's because it's a wave-like pattern. It's moving here and then there. So it's important for you not to judge yourself and to be too harsh, hard on yourself or others who go through this. I've also seen how we go through it differently, but also the same, similarly. So we have similar ways of coping with it, but each person also had a different relationship, especially with my father-in-law. I could see how people, dealt with that. And it was also based on the relationship. That's where you also experience the intensity of the loss. So, what's important, what will also determine whether you're going to cope after the loss, is also how you used to cope with life prior to the loss, and how dependent you were on the person, or the farm, or that burned down, all the work that you had. How important was that for you? How attached to it emotionally were you? Now, I know when you love people and you pour your heart out to them, I mean, you attach to them, and you experience loss. But that's where the Lord comes in to come in and just give us that reassurance of what He is promising us in Christ. And I mean, He's promising us a lot of hope. He does not leave us without hope. But I just want to give you something on depression and grief. you do distinguish psychologically and even pharmacologically from grief and depression. Some people who experience depression prior to the loss might experience depression after the loss, but a grief process is not necessarily, it isn't depression, but it could lead to depression depending on a few things, but it isn't necessarily. So it might mimic it for a while, but it isn't, and pharmacologically, with medication, they've even seen that some of the grief symptoms do not go away with antidepressants, but when there's just depression, the depression leaves. So that's where the difference comes in. Interesting. Just when does grief and bereavement become a problem then? Really, when is it what we call disordered grief, or complicated grief disorder, or these days they also call it prolonged grief disorder? They talk about there's insignificant separation distress. So you feel that distance, that distress because I'm separated from that person. There's that persistent yearning, and there's a preoccupation with feeling that loss of the person. And there's a traumatic distress that you experience because that person is not there. You might find it difficult to accept the death, or feeling that that person, you feel like you've lost a part of yourself. Now, that is also normal, but this is persistent, and it's complicated, and you have a number of these symptoms. It's not just a single symptom now means you've got complicated grief. It's a whole lot of these symptoms. There might be anger, guilt, difficulty to engage with other people after this, or isolating yourself, so those things, and they all go together, and they go together for a long time, and the waves are extreme. And I've seen this in my practice as well. And those disorders actually appear in the latest manuals. And then you get what most people experience, and that's non-complicated grief. So we go through grief and bereavement, but we are resilient in integrating that experience into our lives and continuing with our lives. Now, did you know that when people actually come for help, what they just want to do 4 things. They want to tell their story over and over. And this is important, and they need to express their thoughts and feelings repeatedly, and try to make sense of what happened, so that they can build a new life for themselves without this person that passed away. Some people find it very important to talk about that feelings, as I said, and some a bit more on the problem solving. Let's cope with this. Let's sell the house. Let's get a new car. Let's sort out the will, and let's sort out the whole estate and all those things. And some people left their families with a huge complicated estate that takes years to solve. Please don't do that. Any case, so in the end, what I'm saying to you is that it's okay if you have various experiences, but if you do find yourself, it's been years and you are struggling, and it's really debilitating, it's sucking the life out of you. This loss is just something that you cannot get over. We don't actually talk about that. We don't say you get over something. You live alongside it. You get to live with it. You learn to live with it. But you are feeling that you cannot get to that place where you're struggling to, and it's complicated. Then you need to get professional help. There's another thing that will determine how long or how intense your process might be, and that's how long you've known the person, how attached you were to them, your style of dealing with people, how emotionally close you become, and also how much conflict there was, and how much ambivalence you felt, and also how the person passed away, and those things. So, what's important. There's also, I'd like to just share some ideas with you on this whole process, and I want to share the myths with you. Some myths surrounding this says that some people go into denial, and they deny their feelings, and they say, if I deny it long enough or I ignore it, it'll go away. No, it won't go away. When the moment appears, you need to actually deal with that feeling, and you need to express it. But then you also don't have to dwell on it. Yes, and then there's another one. It's important to be strong. Yes, you want to be strong, and you want to stand up, and you want to be resilient and get to the place of flourishing again. But sometimes being weak is actually being strong. So expressing yourself. But you also, it's also not necessarily the fact that if you don't cry that you are not sad. Some people express it differently. Say, I tend to sometimes say I cry inside, but my tears are not running. So some people show their grief in various ways, and it's okay. Or some people put a time limit on it. It shouldn't be longer than a year or 2 years. It's too even individualized. Or they say, no, Christians shouldn't be so sad because they've got hope. What's wrong with them? Yes, they do cry differently because they've got hope, but it does not mean that they're not sad. And their sadness might be relieved or, helped by some of the hope that they've got, but they will still feel that in those intense short-term pangs, or sometimes even a bit longer. And then what's important as well is that losing somebody is like losing a limb. That means it's very clear that you've lost this limb. If this arm was amputated, I mean, it would be visible. I would struggle to adjust and adapt to my world, and I'd have to go through a huge crying and loss over this. I'll see other people who have arms, and I will be reminded that they've got arms. And then I'll think maybe, hey, they've got an arm, I don't have an arm. So I will see frequent triggers. Yet at some point I'll learn to actually cut the bread with this, and to shower, and to dress, and to drive, and to do all those things of life without my arm. But I'll have this constant reminder. At some point I'll get used to this, and it'll be part of my identity now. I don't have this arm, but I've adjusted so well that I actually don't miss the arm all day long. But here and there I tend to remember, hey, I don't have the arm. So it is important. It's similar to that. And the initial loss and pain, it would be devastating. But then later on, I would adjust and see that life goes on, even though I don't have the arm. And that makes a difference. I want to share a scripture with you from the Psalms 69, the New Living Translation, the first 3 verses. And this describes that experience of loss for me. It's, he's desperate. He says, save me, O God, for the flood waters are up to my neck. Deeper and deeper I sink into the mire. I can't find a foothold. I am in deep water, and the floods overwhelm me. I'm exhausted from crying for help. My throat is parched. My eyes are swollen with weeping, and I'm waiting for my God to help me. That's for me, that shows that desperation and the pain and the angst or the anguish to get just feeling that you're losing and you're sinking into this grief. And it sounds very hard, but that is what you experience, isn't it? And in 1 Samuel 30 verse 3-6, David, the enemy came and took their wives and children and cattle and whatever, and took them away. And then David and his men came back. They found it burned down, and their wives and sons and daughters were taken captive. So David and the troops with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no strength left to weep. It's interesting, eh? They expressed their emotions. They were so devastated. But then David went to the Lord, and the word says he found strength in the Lord his God. So that is, in the end, there's even research that shows that Christians, when they lean on their faith, actually find strength to go through grief. Psalm 116 verse 15 says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. So he finds it very precious. For God, the death of his saints is a very important, almost, it's a rite of passage. It is moving through from this life to the next, into the fully into the eternal realm. So it is amazing. But I just want to tell you, so you remember now that shock and pain and sadness and guilt and anger and fear and worry and anxiety, those things are normal experiences, and they come and go. And even some physical symptoms like you will feel nauseous or sleep or pain, or you would just want to be like a busybody, or you would, some people even become risky, and they do strange, risky things, or they dream about their beloved, and they find themselves dreaming and longing, or they become distant and apathetic. or you cry emotionally, you're drained, you feel empty, you're demotivated. Some people even call that person's name, or they hear them call them. And those are all memories that come back. Or you actually, what I've experienced the last year was, seeing situations and then remembering, oh, he might have acted this way now. Oh, this is something he used to say in a situation like this. Fond memories, but then it also comes with some sadness in remembering the loss. I want to read a section for you that's from Molly Fumia. She says, grief is a journey, often perilous and without clear direction. The experience of grieving cannot be ordered or categorized, hurried or controlled, pushed aside or ignored indefinitely. It is inevitable as breathing, as change, as love. It may be postponed, but it will not be denied. So it is something that you go through and that you go with, actually. So there's not a place where you can say, now I've gone through it, it's closed now, it's off, it's finished, it's gone. So it does not close off. It is something that is experienced throughout your life. But it does not mean that you are going to be dysfunctional because of that. Just hear this in 2 Samuel 18, verse 33. It says, and the king was deeply moved. That is now after the loss of his son, his baby son, his son Absalom. He was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, oh, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son. You could hear he was saddened. So it's hard sometimes. Now, let's just have a look firstly at what does psychology say you need to do. So the idea is to acknowledge the feelings, like I said, and then deal with the practical things of getting your life back in order, of adjusting to your relationships without that person, of dealing with all the practical things, the bills that need to be paid, all those things, but then also sometimes sitting with your emotions and sometimes just giving yourself a break and then focusing on the positive, nice things of life. So psychology talks about post-stress growth or post-traumatic growth, meaning that you can actually grow through this. And we know the Word of God also talks about Romans 8:28, that for those who love God, who are Christians, he will make all things work together for the good, and he will bring the character of Christ, the revelation of who you are in Christ through you. He will actually bring that out into your life, and Christ will become more visible and your relationship with him more intimate through this process. Now, there are a lot of practical things that you can do, and I can't go through all of them, but I'm definitely going to give you a number of these thoughts. And it's important that you note that these are very practical, and but it's important. They say you need to just establish a simple routine, where you regulate your meal and your bedtimes. Why? It just gives you that control. Remember the control aspect. And try to increase pleasant events, though you don't feel like it. The reason for that is then when we do certain pleasant things, what follows are pleasant feelings and pleasant thinking. So it's important, even though we don't feel like it, even though we have to drag ourselves there. I remember the first month after the loss of my father-in-law was a roller coaster. But we did expose ourselves to pleasant events. Me and my wife went on a hike in the mountains, and it was good. It was good, and it was also romantic, and we tried to focus on each other and to remember the beautiful things as well as the sad things. The other things is promote those things that make you feel that you are caring for yourself and that do care for you. So go for regular checkups, medically wise. Do your exercise daily. Limit your alcohol intake. Try to eat healthily. Those things. The basics: the sleeping, showering, those things. Do those things. Get that smell. Every now and then. Shower. I don't have to comb my hair, like you've seen, but try to do those things and try to connect with friends. Now, this is a difficult one that people find. If I connect with some friends, they just try and fix me or give me these short answers, or try, especially some Christians can give you these elastoplast answers like, no, don't worry, you'll see me in heaven, or haha, let's say, Let's be thankful in all circumstances. Yes, we are going to be thankful because the Lord is good and He's there. Yet my heart is in pain, and it's okay to say it. David went up and he wept, and Jesus wept. So there were times where you can express your grief. Okay, but in any case, so read up if you need to on grief, and listen to this program, like what you're doing now. But know that it's not an illness. And it doesn't have a prescribed cure. And you know what? Some children who go through grief of a parent, we sometimes worry about them a lot. But did you know that it could also make them stronger, and even for you? And what you can also do is when you have worries that go all around and you are anxious about a lot of things now, what you need to do is make a list of those worries and then categorize it. Get a tick list where you can actually tick list and a practical list of what you're going to do. Prioritize those things and tick them as they are completed, because it will give you control as well, and it will organize your thoughts, and it will compartmentalize your worries. And then try to sort out your paperwork. Try to keep them separate all the paperwork, and try to get help with that if you need as well. Lean on other people's help here, and remember that sometimes you are going to experience some things, and it will be difficult for you to go to the grave site or the remembrance place that you've set up. Or sometimes it might be difficult to go into the room of the person, or if it was that farm that you lost, you go back to the farm. Some of those things might be difficult, but in time, try to expose yourself to some of those things that you would like to rather avoid. And remember that there will be anniversaries, the first birthday, the first Christmas, the first Thanksgiving, whatever it is. And that what you then do is you can also decide how you want to approach it. So what we did this year with the year anniversary of my father-in-law's passing, family was in lockdown and we were all over the globe. So what we did is we all connected via the internet and a video call, and we all did a braai together. That's barbecue, because our father loved barbecues, he loved rugby, sport, and he loved red wine. So we all enjoyed those, and we watched the Springboks beat England in the World Cup 2019 again. It was good again. In any case, sorry, England. I love England. I stayed there for a number of years, but it was good. In any case, so we did that, and we talked about him, and we laughed about him, and we cried about him, and it was wonderful. So we actually redefined the memory of that time as well. So we have got a positive memory now as well as the sad one. And then tell yourself it's going to be trial and error. I'm going to approach this, do this. This is going to be different, but I'm going to try it. So know that you're going to have to sometimes try things more than once. And then a big thing is that these unhelpful thoughts that we have, sometimes we might have a lot of thoughts that make us angry or feel guilty, and it's important to try to figure out those things. Now, a counselor, psychologist can help you with this, but some thoughts like, I shouldn't have said that, or why did I do this in our relationship, or why didn't I sell the farm last year when I had an offer, or those things are self-blaming, or some things are hopeless thoughts. You need to try to capture those thoughts and to dispute them, and gently ask some questions to those thoughts, like, what would my loved one have told me if they were here now? What alternatives do I have to this? Where's the evidence that this is really true? And if you've screwed up, if you did mess up, and you do feel guilt, then it's appropriate, but to now bash yourself over the head is not going to help either you or your family now, or your friends. So it is important to work with that guilt thing. And then there's another thing, like some difficult decisions, practical things that you need to work through this, like whose belongings, what am I going to do with the clothes, the wedding ring, this and that. What should I move on or not? Those things need to be worked through step by step sometimes, and try to delay some of the major decisions just for the first 12 months, so that you don't make some decisions just based on emotion, but check with some people that you trust as well, and try to solve those problems one at a time, and look at the pros and cons of those decisions. So those are some of the practical things that you can do. What is also important here is that when we deal with these thoughts, it's important to remember that when we go through grief, we've got other people in our lives who also go through a grieving process. Now, as a Christian, you can help them by just understanding, listening, allowing them to speak, even if they sometimes say irrational things. Just allow them just to vent their emotion, because many times it's the emotion that talks. And maybe afterwards you could give your opinion on it, or gently give another perspective on it, instill some hope. And ask them to tell you the story. Ask them to tell them some of the past stories as well. And here and there, check in with them. Don't wait for them to call you. They're probably not going to do that. So call them. Even if you just drop in and give a hug and a kiss. Okay, COVID, give a virtual kiss. Send via WhatsApp, whatever, sanitize your lips, give a kiss. Go and do things with those people alongside them. Ask them you'd like to do something with them. What would they like to do? And if they say they're not in the mood, they don't want to do, then just bring them something or spend some time with them. Don't flood them. But also don't tell them they should just be strong now. Hang in there. You'll get through this. Don't do that. Just be with them with this. And don't say this is for the best or it's going to be okay. Somewhere they know that eventually, if they deal with this, they're going to be okay. But at the moment, the pain is extreme. So you want to help them with the pain. Just be there with them. Having somebody alongside you during those painful times is actually what they need. And then there's that thing of the Lord's promises. When you're in this time, the promises that you've invested in your life also comes to the forefront. So it's important, if you're not in a grieving process, delve into the word of the Lord. Delve into his love, his love, his love, his love, shown through Jesus Christ on the cross, shown through what he's done for us, and how he loves you, and you find your identity in him. And then when you're in that place, that difficult place, you will also lean on him. If you're not there, and if you didn't do that, press in now. Look for his promises. Go for pastoral counseling if you need to. Find the promises of the Lord in his word. Go into worship, and because the Lord is good, and his presence is peace and love. And reach out to people you love and who trust you, and that you trust. Don't try to isolate yourself. That's going to make it worse. Sometimes isolate yourself for a short period of time if you need to. Because we do need that. You remember, it's the moving between those parts. Sometimes we go into, it's a wavy thing. Sometimes we do need some time alone. It's healthy. Do that, but don't do that permanently. Join a grief process at your church or wherever, or a local clinic. Just go join those people. Go and see a therapist. I mean, I'm a therapist. I see people, and just give yourself some permission to go through this. And you know what other people have experienced is years later, suddenly they're married again or whatever, or it's going well, and suddenly they're back there. Something triggered it. It's okay. Give yourself, acknowledge those feelings, work with it. It's all right if you experience it again. And if it hits you hard, it's all right. Acknowledge it and work through it. Talk about it. And allow others to love you. And also, you can also do lots of practical things, like set up a shoebox with all kinds of important things of that person and go through it every now and then. We have a slideshow of pictures that we go through. That's also nice. And it's okay, if you want to set up a Facebook memoriam page or any of those things. And it's also okay if at some point you feel like you've met somebody else, you're loving that person, it's good, you're moving. It doesn't mean you are betraying your loved one. It means that you are living your life. Because you lived your life with that person, now you're living your life still. And that person's life ended, or that farm, it's part of your past now, or you're moving on to a next phase, a new part of your life. And it's okay if you experience joy, and if you enjoy things. And it's also okay if you feel like, I'm going on with my life and I've greeted the person. We don't see it as a letting go and you've got to let go. It is more like I've accepted the reality of the loss and I've acknowledged the feelings and I'm adjusting to my life now. What you can also do is to build the future again, to give yourself hope for the future, is to look for new goals and dreams and plans for the future, like studying or getting a new job as well, new hobbies, and start to reach out to other people. Start to do charity work, help other people. You might feel so devastated, you just want to, I don't have energy, I don't have the strength, but you know it. This is reciprocal. If you give, you will receive, because giving is better than receiving. And it's okay if you say goodbye at your own way, in your own way. And some people write letters and they go and throw them into the sea in a bottle, or they go and read to the gravesite and they read the letter, the goodbye letter. Some people write a song, whatever it is. Express yourself in that way. And please, and it's okay if you remember there will be triggers, and it's also okay if you are triggered at some point. It might not feel okay, it might feel like a shock, but when you're in that place and you're triggered, it's important just to allow yourself. They talk about mindfulness, being in the moment, non-judgmental to your feelings and thoughts, just allowing those to be there. And that's where the Holy Spirit is as well. You talk to him. You say, Lord, I'm feeling this now. He's your friend. He's your comforter. He's your intercessor. He's praying for you. So call on him. Talk to the Lord Jesus right there in your pain and share your feelings with him. And it's okay if you cry. You can sometimes expect those feelings. And it's okay if you also, I had a client with complicated grief who built a shrine in her house for her mother. And she had to now work through the loss there and the attachment and start to find other attachments in her life, not become over-dependent on people, but interdependent. But sometimes, you need to express it in some way like we did. We had a little ritual, and rituals are also good. So you can set up those things. And what is also important is sometimes when you are preparing for like Christmas now, you can prepare the day. You can prepare it with joy and crying. You can do those things. And you can remember all the good stuff. And you don't have to lie about the bad stuff. You can talk about it. But you can also start those new traditions and build new relationships. So these things are the important thoughts that I can share with you tonight. What I just want to leave you with is that you might tell yourself, look, I've gone through this process now and I've struggled. I don't know if the Lord's really there. I don't feel him. I don't feel like he's with me. It feels like he's caused this. And why did he take my husband away or my wife? Why did he do this? Or why didn't he stop that person from killing my husband or wife, or stop the motor vehicle accident, or whatever it was? The Lord just wants to come and comfort you and tell you that I'm still with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. My presence is with you. You are precious to me. And the Lord's not the one who brings death and destruction into your life. It's the cause of sin in our lives and it's sin in the world that's brought in death and destruction. The Lord is here, and yes, He does remind us that in this life we will have lots of troubles, but be strengthened, be encouraged, because He has overcome the world and death. So that means He has bought eternal life for us. Jesus did mention that He's not the God of the dead, but of the living. So, and then when He was referring to Moses and Elijah, they are alive, though they are not on earth anymore. So they are alive. So the Lord says, that's where Jesus' hope says that those who believe in me won't die, they will live eternally. So if you've put your trust in Him, you will live eternally, and that goes beyond your temporal life. So hang on to the eternal view as well. But the Lord loves you, and He's not the one who's killing. Yes, sometimes He does not control everything on earth, otherwise we lose our free will if He controls every little thing. And our times are in His hands. The days of our book in Psalm 139 are written in His, the days of our life lives are written in his book, the number of days as well. So he knows, and I entrust my life to the Lord. So, but if it's happened, it is sad, and the Lord sees your tears, and he does empathize with you. We don't have a high priest. He does not empathize with our weaknesses, being tempted in every way. He knows what we go through. He's gone through loss. They even hypothesized that Jesus' father, Joseph, his earthly father, passed away. He wasn't his biological father, because we know that was the Father in heaven. But it was lost, because he's never mentioned after the age of 12. It's just, to know that he experienced all those difficult things as well. So there we go through these pains, and then the Lord comes, and he wants to give us healing, and he wants to restore joy to you. So I want to just bless you, and may the Lord just make his face to shine upon you and give you peace and tranquility in your heart. So as you reach out to the Lord Jesus, may he just come and comfort you and send the Comforter to help you. If you find yourself angry at God and you are fighting with him, yes, be honest with the Lord about your feelings, but remember, you do need him so much, and that he does not want to reject you. He wants to love you, and he will wait for you. He will be there for you. And ask him if you need answers. Sometimes we do get some answers, but run to him, not away from him. And that in the end, most people find that they adjust to their lives. They actually become stronger, closer to the Lord, closer to other people. They find more meaning in life. It's as if they were able to throw off some of the other things that ensnared them, that made life difficult. They are focused more on the important things, and they are finding new love and new life. So may the Lord bless you and comfort you. What I will do is I'm going to also do workshops on this, where we get into more depth with this. But this is enough for now. So God bless you. All of the best. And please share this video with other people so that they can also benefit from this. Cheers.